February 27, 1991. Objective Norfolk, northern Kuwait, approximately 30 kilometers from the Iraqi border. Staff Sergeant David Belavia commands the gunner position in M2A2 Bradley Fighting Vehicle B-23, call sign Bandit 23, advancing northeast with the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment through Iraqi defensive positions. Dawn breaks across flat desert terrain, offering clear visibility for kilometers in every direction. Through his thermal sight, Belavia detects a thermal signature 1,200 meters ahead, the distinctive heat pattern of an idling diesel engine. He magnifies the image and identifies a Soviet-designed T-55 medium tank, hull down behind a sandberm, turret oriented toward American lines. The Iraqi crew apparently intends to engage advancing American armor, waiting to fire at close range where their 100mm main gun achieves maximum effectiveness. Belavia reports the contact to his vehicle commander, Lieutenant Marcus Chen, who makes the tactical decision. Engage immediately before the T-55 crew spots their Bradley and opens fire. Iraqi doctrine treats infantry fighting vehicles as support platforms that withdraw when encountering main battle tanks. The T-55 crew almost certainly expects any American infantry vehicles to retreat and call for M1 Abrams tanks to handle the threat. They do not expect direct engagement from an armored personnel carrier. This assumption represents a fundamental misunderstanding of American combined arms doctrine and Bradley capabilities. Belavia switches his ammunition selector from high-explosive rounds to M791, armor-piercing discarding sabot tracer ammunition, specifically designed to penetrate armored targets. He centers the thermal crosshairs on the T-55's turret side, where armor thickness measures perhaps 80 millimeters, rather than the 200 millimeters protecting the frontal arc. The laser rangefinder confirms 1,200 meters distance. The fire control computer calculates the ballistic solution, accounting for range, crosswind, and vehicle movement. Belavia waits for the firing solution light to illuminate, then squeezes the trigger. The M2A2 Bushmaster 25mm chain gun fires 6-round bursts at 900 rounds per minute cyclic rate, depleted uranium penetrators streaking downrange at over 3,500 feet per second. The first burst strikes the T-55's turret, armor-piercing rounds punching through the side plate and devastating internal systems. Smoke erupts from the tank's engine compartment. The turret traverse mechanism fails, leaving the main gun fixed in position, unable to track targets. The gunner's optics shatter from the impact, blinding the crew to threats they cannot engage. Within 30 seconds, the T-55 crew abandons their vehicle through the commander's hatch and side hatches, running toward cover while Belavia ceases fire. American rules of engagement prohibit targeting personnel who have surrendered or abandoned fighting positions. The disabled T-55 remains in place, turret askew, a tactical victory for an infantry fighting vehicle against a main battle tank in direct combat. Iraqi armor doctrine, built on decades of Soviet training emphasizing rigid separation between tank and infantry vehicle roles, has just suffered a shocking demonstration of its obsolescence. Iraqi armored forces in 1991 operate primarily with Soviet-designed equipment and Soviet-influenced doctrine developed through decades of military cooperation between Baghdad and Moscow. The T-55 medium tank represents the backbone of Iraqi armor capabilities, proven through 8 years of combat during the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988. The T-55 mounts a 100mm D-10T main gun capable of penetrating 200 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters range with armor-piercing ammunition, sufficient to engage most armored vehicles on 1980s battlefields. Frontal armor measuring 200 millimeters provides protection against medium-caliber weapons, while side and rear armor measures 60 to 80 millimeters, adequate against infantry weapons and light vehicle armament typical of that era. Iraqi tank crews experienced in combat against Iranian armor formations possess confidence in T-55 capabilities and Soviet tactical doctrine. That doctrine emphasizes clear separation of roles within armored formations. Tanks engage enemy tanks, main battle tanks versus main battle tanks, heavy armor against heavy armor. Infantry fighting vehicles support tank operations by transporting infantry, suppressing anti-tank positions with automatic cannon fire and protecting flanks against infantry threats. Soviet doctrine never envisions direct combat between infantry fighting vehicles and main battle tanks. IFVs withdraw when encountering enemy armor, call for tank support, and allow heavy armor to handle the engagement. This doctrine works adequately when both sides operate under similar assumptions and capabilities. Iraqi intelligence assessments of the M2 Bradley describe it as an armored personnel carrier with light armament, comparable to Soviet BMP infantry fighting vehicles. Intelligence reports note the Bradley's 25mm automatic cannon, but assess it as effective only against lighter vehicles, soft-skin targets, and infantry positions, not serious threats to tank armor. Iraqi planners expect American tactics to follow familiar patterns. Tanks engage tanks while Bradleys remain in supporting roles. The possibility that American infantry fighting vehicles might engage Iraqi tanks directly, much less defeat them, does not feature prominently in Iraqi tactical planning or crew training. This represents a critical intelligence failure that costs Iraqi forces dearly during Desert Storm. The M2A2 Bradley Fighting Vehicle that Staff Sergeant Bladley operates differs fundamentally from the support vehicle Iraqi intelligence describes. At its heart sits the M2A2 Bushmaster 25mm chain gun, an automatic cannon capable of firing 200 rounds from the ready magazine at cyclic rates reaching 900 rounds per minute. The weapon fires multiple ammunition types selected by the gunner for specific threats: high explosive incendiary rounds for light vehicles and infantry, and M791 armor-piercing discarding sabot tracer rounds specifically designed for engaging armored targets. The APDST ammunition uses depleted uranium penetrators that achieve velocities over 3,500 feet per second, generating kinetic energy sufficient to penetrate 3 inches of steel armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. Against T-55 side armor measuring 60 to 80 millimeters, approximately 2 to 3 inches, the penetration capability proves decisive. The Bradley carries additional armament that extends its combat capability far beyond infantry support roles. A twin-tube Tau-2 missile launcher mounted on the left side of the turret provides anti-tank capability, rivaling dedicated tank destroyers. TOW missiles engage targets at ranges up to 3,750 meters, exceeding the effective range of Iraqi T-55 and even more modern T-72 tank main guns. Each missile carries a shape-charge warhead capable of penetrating over 30 inches of armor, sufficient to defeat any tank in Iraqi service. The Bradley crew can engage armored threats at extreme range with TOW missiles, then transition to 25mm cannon fire at closer ranges, maintaining offensive capability across the entire engagement envelope. A 7.62mm coaxial machine gun provides suppressive fire against infantry and soft targets. Protection features combine aluminum armor with applique steel plates providing resistance against 30mm armor-piercing rounds across the frontal arc. Not sufficient to withstand direct hits from tank main guns, but adequate against most threats infantry fighting vehicles typically encounter. The Bradley's defensive doctrine emphasizes mobility and superior fire control rather than heavy armor. At 40 miles per hour cross-country speed, the Bradley moves significantly faster than T-55 tanks limited to 30 miles per hour, enabling American crews to maneuver for favorable engagement positions rather than accepting static duels where heavier armor provides advantage. The vehicle maintains amphibious capability, swimming at 4.7 miles per hour when necessary, a feature that proves less relevant in Kuwait's desert terrain, but demonstrates the platform's versatility. The crew consists of 3 personnel: commander, gunner, and driver, plus 6 infantry soldiers carried in the rear compartment. However, the infantry typically dismount before direct combat engagements, leaving the 3-person crew to operate the vehicle as a fighting platform rather than merely a transport. This reflects American combined arms doctrine that treats infantry fighting vehicles as combat systems rather than protected taxis. Fire control systems give the Bradley decisive advantages in detecting and engaging threats. The integrated thermal sight operates day or night, penetrating darkness, dust, and smoke that blind optical systems. The thermal imager detects heat signatures from engine exhaust, recently fired weapons, and vehicle components, displaying targets as bright shapes against cooler backgrounds. This capability proves critical in desert environments where sandstorms and smoke from burning vehicles create visual obscuration. The laser rangefinder provides precise distance measurements, enabling accurate first-round engagements at extended ranges. Gun stabilization permits fire-on-move capability. The Bradley can engage targets accurately while traveling at speed, unlike earlier vehicles requiring stationary positions for effective fire. These systems integrate through the fire control computer that calculates ballistic solutions automatically, reducing gunner workload and increasing engagement speed. FMC Corporation designed the Bradley for infantry support, but engineered capabilities enabling independent armored combat when tactical situations demand it. The $3.2 million per vehicle cost in 1988, substantial for an infantry fighting vehicle, reflected these sophisticated systems. Critics argued the Bradley tried to perform too many roles simultaneously, compromising effectiveness in any single mission. Desert Storm operations would test whether the investment in multi-role capability produced combat value or merely expensive vulnerability. Objective Norfolk operations during February 26 and 27, 1991, provide the decisive test. Bradley platoons from multiple cavalry and mechanized infantry units advanced through Iraqi defensive positions, encountering armored forces that Iraqi commanders positioned to engage American tanks. But American combined arms doctrine places Bradleys throughout formations rather than segregating them in purely support roles. When Bradley crews detect Iraqi armor, they engage immediately with weapons appropriate to the threat, rather than withdrawing and requesting tank support. Multiple T-55 tanks suffer disabling hits from 25mm armor-piercing fire delivered by vehicles Iraqi doctrine dismisses as non-threats to heavy armor. The tactical approach Bradley crews employ exploits mobility advantages and superior fire control systematically. When detecting Iraqi tanks, Bradley commanders maneuver their faster vehicles to flank positions where they can engage thinner side or rear armor rather than accepting frontal engagements against the T-55's 200mm glacis plate. The thermal sights detect Iraqi vehicles before Iraqi crews using optical sights and simple night vision achieve acquisition in dusty conditions and obscured visibility. This detection advantage provides engagement initiative. American gunners fire first, often achieving disabling hits before Iraqi crews identify the threat's location. TOW missiles enable Bradleys to engage Iraqi armor at extreme ranges beyond the effective reach of tank main guns, forcing Iraqi tanks to close distance under fire or withdraw without returning effective shots. The Battle of Objective Dorset demonstrates Bradley capabilities conclusively. 4 M2A2 Bradleys from a single platoon encounter, 9 Iraqi T-55 tanks occupying defensive positions. Conventional doctrine suggests the infantry fighting vehicles should withdraw immediately and call for Abrams tanks to engage the superior force. Instead, the Bradley platoon leader assesses the tactical situation. His vehicles possess superior fire control and mobility. The Iraqis occupy static positions, and engagement ranges favor American sensors. He orders immediate engagement using coordinated tactics. The 4 Bradleys maneuver to separate positions, dividing Iraqi fire and presenting multiple threats simultaneously. Gunners employ TOW missiles against the most threatening targets at long range, then transition to 25mm fire against closer vehicles. Within 15 minutes, 8 T-55 tanks are disabled, turrets jammed, optics defeated, crews abandoning vehicles. 1 tank escapes by withdrawing rapidly behind cover. 0 Bradleys suffer serious damage. This engagement represents perhaps the most dramatic tactical victory of infantry fighting vehicles defeating main battle tanks in modern armored warfare history. Iraqi personnel who survive Bradley engagements consistently report confusion about the nature of the threat they faced. They expected American tanks, M1 Abrams with distinctive profiles and 120mm main guns. They did not expect infantry vehicles to engage them directly with weapons capable of penetrating their armor. One captured Iraqi tank commander tells interrogators that his crew couldn't understand why armor-piercing rounds came from what intelligence briefings described as troop carriers. By the time Iraqi units realized Bradley capabilities exceeded intelligence assessments, tactical situations had already deteriorated beyond recovery. The psychological impact compounds physical losses. Iraqi tank crews lose confidence in their armor protection and training, understanding that even American support vehicles can defeat them in direct combat. Operations at 73 Easting on February 26th placed Bradleys alongside M1 Abrams tanks in large-scale armored engagements against Republican Guard forces. Bradley crews contribute significantly to the destruction of Iraqi armored formations, engaging targets that Abrams tanks bypass or cannot immediately address. The integration demonstrates American combined arms effectiveness. Tanks and infantry fighting vehicles operate as mutually supporting teams, rather than hierarchical formations where support vehicles defer to heavy armor. Total Bradley engagements during Desert Storm involve over 100 Iraqi armored vehicles with high success rates against T-55 and T-62 tanks, and several confirmed engagements against more modern T-72 tanks. The reasons T-55 tanks fail against Bradleys involve multiple factors beyond simple weapon penetration capability. Armor vulnerability represents the most obvious factor. T-55 side and rear protection measures 60 to 80 millimeters, easily penetrated by Bradley 25 mm armor-piercing ammunition at combat ranges. Iraqi crews trained to present frontal armor toward threats discover that American mobility enables flanking maneuvers, negating their protection advantage. Fire control gaps prove equally decisive. Bradley thermal sights detect T-55 thermal signatures at ranges where Iraqi optical systems and basic night vision struggle to identify targets through dust and smoke. This detection advantage translates to engagement initiative. The side that fires first often wins armored combat by disabling enemy vehicles before they return effective fire. Iraqi tank crews using optical rangefinders and manual fire control calculations cannot match the speed and accuracy of American laser rangefinders and ballistic computers. Mobility differences enable American tactical advantages. Bradley cross-country speed of 40 miles per hour exceeds T-55 maximum speed of 30 miles per hour significantly. This allows American crews to achieve favorable positions, maneuver during engagements to complicate Iraqi targeting, and withdraw rapidly if tactical situations deteriorate. Iraqi tanks occupying static defensive positions cannot prevent American vehicles from flanking them or breaking contact when necessary. Training disparities compound technical disadvantages. United States Army crews practice combined arms tactics extensively, coordinating infantry fighting vehicles and tanks as integrated teams. Bradley crews train specifically for scenarios where they must engage enemy armor directly, understanding their vehicles' capabilities and limitations. Iraqi tank crews prepared for conventional tank versus tank combat prove unprepared for infantry fighting vehicles employing anti-armor tactics successfully. Soviet doctrine that Iraqi forces followed never envisioned this tactical situation, leaving crews without doctrinal solutions when the unexpected occurs. Doctrine obsolescence represents perhaps the most fundamental factor. Soviet-influenced separation of tank and infantry fighting vehicle roles creates rigid tactical structures that prove inflexible when American forces blur those distinctions. Iraqi commanders place tanks where they expect enemy tanks, position infantry vehicles in support roles, and plan defensive schemes assuming predictable American responses. American combined arms doctrine that treats infantry fighting vehicles as combat platforms capable of independent action disrupts these plans fundamentally. Iraqi responses remain constrained by doctrinal assumptions that no longer match battlefield reality. The strategic impact of Bradley performance during Desert Storm reverberates through military planning worldwide. The engagements prove that modern infantry fighting vehicles, armed with appropriate weapons, sensors, and fire control, can engage light and medium tanks effectively with proper tactics. This forces adversary nations to reconsider how they assess threats. Infantry fighting vehicles can no longer be dismissed as support vehicles that withdraw when encountering heavy armor. Any armored vehicle equipped with sophisticated fire control and adequate weaponry represents a potential threat to tanks, requiring defensive responses previously reserved for anti-tank systems and opposing armor. Doctrinal shifts follow as military organizations worldwide study Desert Storm lessons. The rigid separation of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles that Soviet doctrine emphasized gives way to more flexible combined arms approaches, recognizing that distinctions between vehicle classes matter less than overall combat capability. Modern infantry fighting vehicles incorporate increasingly powerful weapons specifically to engage enemy armor. 30mm and 40mm automatic cannons with advanced armor-piercing ammunition, anti-tank guided missiles, and fire control systems rivaling those mounted on main battle tanks. The M2 Bradley remains in frontline service with United States Army forces in 2025, 43 years after the first vehicles entered service in 1982. Upgraded variants incorporate improved weapons, additional armor protection, enhanced sensors, and digital fire control systems. The basic platform proves sufficiently capable and adaptable that complete replacement remains unnecessary despite technological advances in armored vehicle design. Later variants demonstrate continued effectiveness in combat operations from Desert Storm through Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, maintaining relevance across multiple generations of warfare. The story of Bradley fighting vehicles engaging Iraqi tanks during Desert Storm illustrates fundamental principles about modern armored warfare. Vehicle classification, tank, infantry fighting vehicle, armored personnel carrier, matters less than specific capabilities each platform brings to combat. Mobility, fire control, and crew training often prove more decisive than armor thickness or main gun caliber. American investment in sophisticated sensors and fire control systems created capabilities that enabled lighter vehicles to engage heavier opponents successfully by achieving engagement advantages that armor protection could not overcome. Combined arms doctrine that integrated diverse vehicle types as mutually supporting teams defeated rigid doctrines segregating forces by vehicle class. Iraqi forces planned conventional armored warfare where tanks engage tanks and infantry vehicles remain in supporting roles. This represented orthodox military thinking based on decades of Soviet doctrine and practical experience from the Iran-Iraq War. American forces fought combined arms warfare where every platform contributed offensive capability appropriate to tactical situations rather than doctrinal role restrictions. The difference proved decisive. Iraqi T-55 tanks that should have dominated infantry fighting vehicles in conventional doctrine instead found themselves defeated by vehicles they dismissed as non-threats. The psychological and tactical implications shocked Iraqi forces and impressed military observers worldwide. Iraq expected American infantry vehicles to flee from tanks, calling for heavier armor to handle engagements. American infantry vehicles hunted Iraqi tanks using mobility, fire control, and weapons Iraqi intelligence underestimated. The M2 Bradley demonstrated that properly designed and employed infantry fighting vehicles do not support armored warfare. They conduct it.